Mine doesn't work well. Maybe I'll get Ben's. Or maybe I'll get Dennis. He talks a lot, so he knows how to push it on and off. Okay. I'd like to move to item 13.
Item 13 is from the Administrative Office to approve the Administrative Policy Number 001-2020, the grant policy.
The grant policy.
Yes.
That's fine. This is the one that I want. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Board of Supervisors. Krista Von Latta, Deputy CAO, here to discuss with you the grant policy that is put forth in our agenda item. So just, yes, I understand. Thank you. Should anyone wish for me to put the admin policy, the grant policy on the projector, I'm happy to do so. Just by way of a bit of background. So, if anyone would like me to put it on the screen, I'm happy to do so. I hadn't intended to go through the policy page by page, rather just give an overview. We have not had, to my knowledge, a grant policy historically. Smith & Newell, our outside auditor, as well as the grand jury, have both noted for the last few years at least that this has been a deficit and something that we need to correct in the county. As such, we solicited information and buy-in from departments with respect to what they thought of our proposed policy, and then incorporated their feedback. We had selectively deployed it to certain fiscal staff and department heads who have a lot of engagement with the grant process through their ordinary business operations. We addressed their comments, and we believe that they are supportive of this policy. Our goal with respect to the policy was to lay out the ground rules so that everybody knows what they are, document the process that we would like county departments to use throughout their grant writing endeavors, simplify the process both for departments and for the board so that it can be as efficient as possible without undermining the board's authority with respect to personnel, monetary matches, and the like. And then to just generally cut down on the number of items that go to board. So broadly speaking, the board has the authority per the policy for all grants, but the board is also empowered were the policy to be adopted as written to delegate certain of that authority to departments. So for example, so long as there is no mandated personnel, additional position, or county match, or other county funds required, department heads would be authorized to make any grant application up to $50,000. Likewise, with the authority, or with the approval of the CAO, also delegated authority by the board, the CAO would be able to accept, based on a memo from the department with 5 days to refuse, but that $50,000, up to $50,000 worth of grant funds, without that grant ever having had to go to board. We would see this as a tremendous efficiency with respect to many of our smaller departments who have ongoing $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 grants annually. That are all different and take up a lot of the board's time and department time in preparing those agenda items. So the exception to that would be any grant that requires personnel or additional funding of some sort. Those would all have to be accepted by the board in any case, unless what the department does is choose to opt for either a limited or a full delegated authority under the policy. And where we would expect to see this is where departments on the blanket authority, as it's referred to in the policy, this is where departments that have ongoing recurring grants could come to the board, lay out those grants, lay out, if there were to be a county match, whatever those caps would be in a 1, 2, or 3-year period, and request that the board delegate its authority to continue to sign amendments, to accept the funds, to make the applications for the grants, et cetera, during that window, so long as the authority that's delegated in their initial request agenda item is not surpassed. So these contracts would all still be routed. That agenda item delegating such authority would have to be approved by the board. That's the mechanism that's built into this policy that we hope would really facilitate departments' operations year over year and minimize the number of items that are really truly more or less non-controversial that would have to come before the board. We've also built into this policy a provision that would allow the county administrative officer to sign a grant application in excess of $50,000, but up to $500,000. And I note that these dollar caps they're informed by what our experience has been and what other counties, at least as much as the $50,000 cap goes, have done, but they are somewhat arbitrary. We could change these dollar amounts in any event. So, and what informs us here are these one-off experiences where we'll get, just recently, for example, a letter from the governor saying, your county, if you sign this letter, is entitled to $162,000 for PSPS grant funding that needs to be used in a particular way that was due back almost immediately. So this provision is intended to give the CAO the authority to sign off on those semi-regular, probably, I mean, not totally semi-regular, they're more or less one-offs, but to be able to get that going, and still with the understanding that the CAO wouldn't obligate the board to a county match or additional personnel. Maybe CAO would only have the authority in that case to make a grant application that would still be required to come before the board if there was a county match or personal mandate in it. I note, though, with respect to that as drafted, it's intended to be for a one-off scenario. As a practical matter, the board could just choose to say, well, that's actually fine with us if the CAO wants to sign off on grant applications for up to $500,000 with the understanding that they would have to come back to board in order to be accepted. That would be within the board's purview, and we could change, for example, the caps in this document to reflect that. I note that nothing in here would change the reality that any appropriation increase and any revenue increase, in order to be budgeted, either has to be budgeted through the ordinary budget process or would need to be brought as a separate standalone agenda item. For example, some of the changes that are included in the mid-year budget are additional grant funds that have been otherwise approved. For example, the economic development item that you heard earlier today. That said, that's still completely and totally within the board's authority, and it would be up to the department to determine whether to do it at mid-year, the standalone item, or in the recommended or final budgets over the summer and early fall. Does the board have any questions?
Any questions? Mr. Mills?
I do. Page 158, Krista. 158, this would be H, General Grant Management, H. It says tracked by JL in one solution, but I can't find anything else previous to that in the document of what a JL is.
A JL is a job ledger, and a job ledger would be used in a budget unit where, for example, the OES main operating budget as opposed to being a standalone budget unit like we have in certain of the sheriff's department funds, where the entire org key, or budget unit, as the board is typically refers to them, you would have that one grant associated more or less with that one budget unit, and then maybe some general fund monies in that budget as well. Where we would expect to see a JL is in a budget unit that has more than one restricted funding or grant funding source, and then we would have those funds tracked to that job ledger behind, so that we can easily go back and audit on an ongoing basis year over year.
I was just for clarity asking that the first time that the acronym be used, that it be identified, just makes it easier in the system.
Okay.
So we don't come to that, any
Understood.
false conclusions.
Apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board comments at this time? Does any staff or member of the public want to comment on this grant policy? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the board. I have, on all grants, in this, with this policy, does it still go to the auditor before it's signed off by the department and/or the CAO?
So that's interesting. Are you referring specifically to the recommendation that we received from, I believe, Smith and Newell? We had that conversation. Administration and the auditor controller specifically discussed that it is not feasible for the auditor controller to sign off on every submission that is made to a funding agency, and we determined not to make that recommendation in this policy at this time.
So unless the grantor says it has to be accepted by the Board of Supervisors, then this will lie with the CAO and a department head, depending on the dollar cap, correct?
Depending, yes. It's most certainly nothing in this policy is intended to circumvent grant guidelines, applicable law, et cetera. And within those caps, yes, it would either be no grant could be accepted without the authority of at least the CAO up to $50,000.
Right.
They would still need to go to the board with respect to the budget, budgetary ramifications of that.
So most of the grants come to us as giving a department authorization to apply for the grant. In this case, that doesn't have to come to us unless it's required.
If it were required by the grant, or whatever the funding agreement is, then it would need to come to the board. If it were over 50,000, it would need to come to the board,
Right.
With the understanding that in certain instances where business demands it and it's not reasonably practicable to get to the board, the CAO could make those, sign those applications. But nothing in this policy, unless it were under the blanket or the limited authority that were a board agenda item and delegated in that item, would allow a department to sign off or accept any grant that had any monetary match or requirement for additional personnel attached to it.
I mean, part of this process is accepting the grant.
That's right.
The second part of the process is, okay, we've got the grant. And it's a very cumbersome process. I really like this. Thank you very much for doing this.
My
A
pleasure.
lot of time goes into, I keep thinking, why are we doing this? I mean, I support what it is. I would like to, at least maybe if you could just put a mental note or a sticky note in a year to come back and let us know how the process is working.
Absolutely, and I should have mentioned that in the presentation. We understand that this is a jumping off point, and there may be something that we simply did not foresee or that would be an easy tweak that we can recommend, so absolutely.
The only sort of downside I see is then we really are out of the process of knowing what departments are getting grants for. So sometimes we see that they're going to apply for a grant for a particular project, and God, that's great. And so we kind of miss that interaction of knowing what is it departments are wanting, what are the programs that are coming, that are being funded. I mean, the bureaucratic portion, I think this is excellent. The communication is missing.
No, and I'm sympathetic to that, and that's the type of delicate line that it's difficult to wash when it's difficult to thread sometimes when drafting a policy. I don't think that we are suggesting, certainly if there were something, even if it did fall within the under the $50,000 cap, that would preclude a department from having that conversation with our office and asking that they bring it before the board, or maybe just as an informational item, bring it as a quick announcement or in a staff announcement at the beginning of the meeting. I also note that many of the larger initiatives will certainly fall over the $50,000 limit, and in that case, they would be coming to board anyway, certainly if they have a county match. But so I don't know. We'll have to see, and if it's an issue, we can address that.
It would be easy enough for us to have a log and either bring it back monthly or quarterly to show the ones that have been approved within the policy, just so there's a record of the board having viewed them and seen them. If we could put it on a consent item, and if there's any questions, it could always be pulled, as we always do. Otherwise, you're just regularly getting an information item that tracks them.
And just to also, unless the grant funding is already as part of budget, you're also going to need to see it, or in terms of actually allocating the grant funding, that's something that generally always is going to have to come back to you. So you'll see it on that end at least.
Mr. Tupperman.
Yeah, the way this is written and the way it is, I can't support it. The $50,000 thing for departments, the way I read it, if it is over $50,000, it doesn't necessarily have to come to the board. It can go through the CAO with his approval, up to $500,000. That's where I have an issue, is $500,000, and it may not require matching funds by the county. But depending on how that grant is worded, if you don't spend all of the money or you don't use it properly, then the county is on the hook for any money that was spent out of that. I think it's our duty as supervisors to stay on top of all of the money and issues that are being done here and what the grants are. When the grants come before us, I read the grants and see what the perimeters are in it and what it entails before it comes to us. And us being sucked out of the loop virtually, because I don't see a lot of grants over $500,000, it takes us completely out of it, whether we're going to get a quarterly thing on it or not. It's already been expended. It's already been signed. It's already been done. And I don't think that's correct, and I just shudder at something up to $500,000 not coming before us, but until something's already gone wrong with it. And we've expended the funds, and now we're being asked budget-wise to take out a contingency or whatever to pay back funding or whatever. I'd like to know where the county is at all times, monetarily-wise, and where money is being spent and money being brought in, and what those parameters are. So I'm happy the way it is right now. I'm happy them having to bring grants to us for our approval so we can see and understand exactly what we're getting the county into. So,
if I may, just would like to point out that certainly the $500,000 number can be adjusted. And secondly, it would not be possible for departments to budget a $500,000 grant without board authority. So even though those funds would be accepted, there would be no appropriations made with respect to those funds until the board were to act, either through the ordinary budget process or in standalone agenda items.
And I fully understand that, but the process has already been done. The way it's done now, it comes before us, and we can have a discussion on it, and we can see it before. And that's what's being taken away here. The process has already been done, the money's been awarded, you're just waiting for us to appropriate it. And then if we don't appropriate it, depending on what the parameters of that grant are, we could be on the hook for some of that money. And you know, some of those grants are depending on expending that money within a certain amount of time on certain things. And I, for one, like to see and be able to read what those parameters are before I agree to it. I think that's the job of a supervisor. That's what our mainstay is. So that's where I am on this.
I guess I see it differently. You know, they come, can we apply for the grant? Yes, you can apply for the grant. Then they get the grant. Well, can we accept the grant? And I find that very redundant, and I don't ever know of an occasion where we've been on the hook for something because a department, well, I mean, I don't, you'd have to tell me what they are. I just think this is a way to make it easier for the department, especially on the small ticket ones that are the 5, the 10, the 20,000. I mean, putting a staff report together and coming, that's very time consuming. And they still follow the routing process. It's still looked at by council. It's looked at, not in all cases, as Smith and Newell asked, because you answered that question. And the CAO, I think we have to start letting go of some things. And
I'm ready to let go.
well, I am. I'm ready. I want to support this. I'd like to give it a try and see how it works, see how the departments like it, see if it causes a problem with anything we're doing or things happening that that there's surprises. I think what Gary's saying is he doesn't like surprises. I don't either, but there's other ways to cover that. So I'd like to support this and find a way to try and simplify the process of the grant application and acceptance process. We need to move, maybe we can put it on track it. I don't. Mr. Mills.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the fiduciary responsibility rests with us, and I know that there have been situations, and we have a department head back in the corner of the room right now that knows that I have found errors in grant writing. It's not that it cost us anything, it's just simply just verbiage sometimes, it's dates, it could be anything simple, but the point is, it means that we are reviewing them. Secondly, have we gotten caught and had to deobligate? Yes, that has happened. So what's been the cost of that? Staff time? Maybe we're, partially into something and we have to back away from it. I have a concern with removing this piece from our view, and our fiduciary responsibility is, we generally are going to create an obligation whether we like it or not, simply by applying and saying to another agency that we have the capacity and the ability to do something in exchange for a certain amount of money. So I think better we know about those things up front, early, than to be finding out about it after the grant has been received and then it's subject to our approval, and then if there's a controversy, what do we do next? So I see this as just taking one thing off of our plate that I would not like to have off of my plate.
So if I might add a little bit of context, all very good points, valid points. I'm taking notes on it as well. The reason this policy has come forward to the board in the first place is not necessarily a concern that we had in the process, that administration had in the process, but that the grand jury and our external auditors have made findings in this. So we're bringing an option forward. If it were as narrow as the section 2 with the high dollar amounts and we just go down to the smaller grants, that's an option too. There's ways we can modify this to close it down a little bit. But most importantly, we were trying to create the opportunity to meet the requirements of the grand jury and the external auditors by bringing it forward and at least starting the discussion on how we might not only meet their requirements, but also help streamline some of the process with the board as well.
And I have the Smith and Newell management letter in the trunk of my car out there right now, so I'm familiar with, what they've said and why they've said what they've said.
I guess we'll all weigh in. I'm in support of this policy. I think I'm willing to give it a shot for a year, hear how it works. If it streamlines things, I think sometimes as a board, it's awfully tempting to have our fingers in absolutely everything. And that's going to take some discipline on our part. So I'd be in support of this.
Okay, so as I'm hearing the board, it's sort of a 2-2 with one absent, so we can bring it back when Mr. Stopper is here. So at the moment, this item fails. Okay.
We haven't voted.
Would you like to table it to another meeting?
Yeah, I think we should table it until when Ben's here, all five of us are here.
So could I have a motion
Yeah.
to do that if that's what you're going to do?
So move to table this item till the next, should we put on, well, next
Whenever.
board meeting's already posted, so.
Yeah,
discussion
the one after that?
And
Is
I
that-
will second that motion.
Okay. A motion by one yes person and a second by one no person. By
Diversity.
diversity, we like that.
Diversity, yes.
By Supervisor Garamendi and a second by Supervisor Mills. All in favor? Aye. Passes on a 4-0, one absent. To reschedule this item. Pardon?
We can just roll the item over to the 10th.
You can?
Just roll it over the way it is to the 10th.
Okay.
Do you need to modify, do I need to modify my motion, or?
No,
we're good?
because it just said to, yeah. Okay, thank you. Good idea, Diane, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I appreciate the work on this, though. All right. Let's go to item 17.
Item 17 is from the Administrative Office to receive the fiscal year 2019-20 mid-year budget report, approve the mid-year budget adjustments included in attachments A and B, and approve the mid-year capital assets list included as attachment C. Requires a 4/5 affirmative vote of the board.
So this item is an item that consistently comes this time of year before the board, as you are aware. I'll provide just some context here real quickly, that this mid-year report is very consistent with what we brought in the final budget in September. There's not much different detail in it, and I think it's important to note for the board that in final budget in September, we adopted some pretty significant decisions. The first of which is that we've had successive years of deficit budgets that have been approved by the board. In this particular budget in September, we adopted our policy minimums for reserve and contingencies, and those were really based on the practice that we had changed with our disaster budgets and the revenues that had been carrying over year after year in the disaster budgets. And then ultimately, we adopted MOUs for our collective bargaining agreements that weren't accounted for in the September final budget. And those are important because those are significant policy decisions that have essentially put down the footprint for our budget. And while our fiscal outlook is pretty good in the fiscal year, our revenues are looking strong, and for the most part, we have good news to report. The decisions we made in September will continue to influence not only this year, and no enhancements in revenues in just 6 months are going to erase the significant policy decisions that we've made. So the mid-year budget is really written, or the report is really written around being very conservative, and you'll see that there's very few additions being made in it. Krista will provide all the detail, and I'd like to extend my appreciation to her for all the work that she's done on this. As you know, our office has had quite a bit of resignations, retirements, and transitions, so we're all picking up different duties and responsibilities, and Krista has stayed fast on the budget and put together a detailed report for you here, and I'll turn it over to her, and she'll hopefully have a presentation to be able to...
Could we just take a minute to get the PowerPoint up? Would that be all right? Thank you.
Are we on break then?
Yeah. 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Alder, you going to proceed or should Krista?
My
What is your-
apologies, I had finished my end and had handed it off to Krista.
Krista, thank you.
Okay. All right. So just a brief overview. We'll go through a brief summary of the expenditures as of December 31, 2019. Same with respect to revenues. We'll do just a brief summary and have discussion regarding where we're at. When we're done with the PowerPoint, we can flip to the actual requests. There are 4 requests that require additional general fund contribution if they were approved by the board. So budgeted versus actual expenses here. We are up approximately $4 million over this time last year. We see 1.3 million of that in salaries and employee benefits, which at 44.3% of the budget is flat in terms of its overall percentage of expenditures to date for salaries and benefits. The 1.3 in that number are approximately comprised by about $600,000 worth of MOU increases that had not been budgeted. Let's see, sorry, forgive me, an additional $1 million in professional and specialized services. $600,000 salaries and benefits, $335,000 in PERS lump sum increase over this time last year, and the remainder being just typical salary progression. Services and supplies is up slightly this year. It's about $1 million higher than it was the prior year. We are still in line with historical years where, with the exception of 2 years ago where it was substantially higher, this is more or less consistent in terms of a percentage of our overall budget. We've got an increase in about $500,000 in capital asset expenditures and $500,000 in operating transfers out, which is largely in our county contributions budget, and that was as a result of increased TOT and other transfers out with respect to our MOEs over last year. This is just a visual depiction of where our general fund monies are going. So salaries and benefits, as with every year, our largest set of expenditures, 44.3% of budget. We discussed services and supplies as well as our second largest category. In terms of salary savings, we've had a lot of discussion about this in prior years and recently as well. There's some interesting things that we noticed with respect to salary and savings as of December 31st, though when we get to the end of the conversation, we'll see that it's not as easy to predict as one might hope. So at this point, as of 12/31, we're running at about 1.98 million in salary savings. If it were as simple as just multiplying that by 2, we would be at a much larger number come year end. So this time last year, we were running at about 1.8 in salary savings. So something, and this is a little bit in the weeds, but over the last couple of fiscal years, we've started actually budgeting salary savings. So we have in our budgets 2 object codes where departments can make requests and where increases or decreases to our base personnel cost forecast expenses are made. One of those is in 5400, and that's salary add delete. So where we would see that is if someone asked to add a position, then they would say we need an extra $75,000 because we want to add this position. But with respect to straight salary savings, that's 5801. And that's where departments can say, well, you know, we think we're going to have $500,000 worth of salary savings because we always have 5 positions vacant, it seems, and they're all approximately $100,000 a year. And one of the policy decisions that was made by the administrative office after consulting with the auditor's office in the past fiscal year was that we were not going to be encouraging departments or the board to release salary savings to cover other expenditures on an ongoing basis, that we really wanted there to be a nexus whereby if we were going to release salary savings to services and supplies, for example, that it would be, take the case of a psychiatrist where we can't fill that position, but we now have to go out and contract because we have legal mandates to provide certain services. So what happened when we did that was we went from, in fiscal year 18-19, a number of the delta of these 2 object codes being budgeted salary savings of 1.68 million to 14,000. So basically nobody told us that they thought they were going to have salary savings in their budgets, which means theoretically in a universe where all else was equal, which of course is not the one we live in, but we would have had about $1.7 million in salary savings budgeted for this current year. We can't use MOU increases necessarily as the excuse for that because at the end of the day, we had about the same dollar amount in MOU increases this time last year. So that's pretty much a wash in terms of the MOU. So at the end of last week, and the reason why I say that it's pretty hard to predict just looking at the 6-month mark where we might end, we're right now only on track to have something on the order of $2.3 million of salary savings, which actually we're projecting downwards, not upwards, in part because we don't believe the Sheriff's Department is experiencing the level of salary savings that they had in prior years. Also in part because we have not a huge number fewer, but we do have fewer open general fund positions over this time last year. And so when we get a little bit later in the presentation, we'll discuss it more. But at the end of the day, we're basically thinking salary savings may be as low as about $2 million. We think that's conservative. We certainly hope it's substantially higher than that. But even with the factors that we've already discussed, it's not clear. There's no indicator right now that that's definitely going to be the case. So overtime costs are actually doing better this year than they were last year. We may hear more from the Sheriff's Department later about their concerns with respect to overtime, but at the mid-year point, they were down across all budget units in the general fund was down substantially from at 23.7% from 867,000 to 662. So we can look back, and this was last year when we talked about the $1.7 million that had been budgeted by departments last year. So when we take what it was at mid-year last year, as of 12/31, we were at 3.8 million, and that's for the entire year. By the time we get to 6/30, for the entire year in our budget, we had basically stayed static off the mid-year number and only lost another 600,000 over this is for the entire year. So last year it would have been 1.925 about. Then here, that's what we ended at. That's what was budgeted. So we were actually at about $5 million of salary savings across the general fund at the end of last year, 6/30. That's why this number is concerning to us. Again, we think it's very conservative, but given that we have dropped from this to about 2.3, just in the space of a couple of months. We're very concerned that we want to project anything higher than this. Right now, I think that's the number we should be thinking. So a big difference over this time last year. This is just a graphical depiction of basically what we're talking about. So if you look at prior fiscal years, you'll see this is the 12/31 number. This is the 12/31 number, same here. This is where it ends at here. What's interesting here, this is 16-17 before we were really budgeting anything in 5400 or 5801. So when you move here, you can actually see what would happen if you were doing the straight salary savings plus this number, you get to this number. Here, we've got none. So it's not particularly encouraging that we don't have more salary savings necessarily to look forward to, and it's one of the things we ask the board to be mindful of going forward with budget decisions. So this slide is intended for us to have a conversation about our disaster budgets and why we made the recommendation to pull the disaster budget revenue out of those budget units. So if we go back, this is kind of like the salary savings. If we go back to 16-17, we had budgeted $88,000 of revenue. What we ended up with was $3.9 million in shortfall. So the overall delta being just shy of $4 million. So the following year, we budgeted $4.4 million, only taking in $1.8 million in revenue. So we were still off by 2.6, even though we received $1.8 million in revenue. This last year, we were out by 2.6. This is not a projection. This is literally just what was budgeted. But we budgeted for, actually this number should be 409. But what we budgeted for was strictly our tree mortality county match over and above the LATM grant that we might experience and some other minor county matches. Everything else would come in the flavor of a REM loan or other revenue that we think can reasonably be anticipated to be received in this current fiscal year. This is a graphical depiction of what those prior years look like that we just discussed. And so here we are with respect to the REM loans and transfers. So what do we have budgeted? Approximately $3.2 million. If we were closing the books on 12/31, we would have made an $84,000 and change REM loan. If you recall, at adopted budget, we budgeted, well, actually, that action had initially transpired in August of 2019, but we continued to recommend and did ultimately the board approve a $448,000 teeter transfer into one particular budget unit. So we would have made almost all of that transfer as of 12/31. As of the 7th of this month, those numbers have changed. We would have made the entire teeter transfer and a $338,000 REM loan. We expect those numbers to change as Public Works largely and their contractors move forward with the projects that they're working on. That said, we may receive offsetting revenue prior to the close of the fiscal year that would affect whether we needed to make any of those REM loans, for example, or needed to unwind part of the teeter transfer that we may have had to make at some point. So in terms of revenues, we're up $3.5 million from last year. This is in large part due to a $929,000 transfer in from PG&E funding into the Butte Road Recovery budget. 1.3 million in increase in revenue and tree mortality over this time last year, and a $1.3 million increase in our general revenues budget unit that would be comprised of various taxes, sales tax, property tax, and the like. So if we actually were to remove the $5.7 million budgeted teeter transfer, we would go from 37.7% of revenue to 42.1% of budgeted revenue. Across all funds under the board's supervision, that number is 39.8%. Last year, the all funds number was higher than the general fund number, for the record. Overall, our collection is relatively strong. So property taxes are about $300,000 more than they were in the prior year. To be expected, they're about 55% of our budgeted revenue. Sales and use taxes are up about $250,000. Measure C revenues, this is interesting. So this time last year, we understood that most of the Measure C, if not all of the Measure C monies we had received were as a result of dispensary tax revenue, due to the fact that the urgency ordinance was no longer in place. So this year, what we see is that actually urgency ordinance grower revenue comprised 58.7% of all of the revenue received as of 12/31, and the flip of that being about 41% for dispensary revenue. Those numbers level out a little bit when you look at them again as of February 18th. Our number was somewhere on the order of about $410,000 for revenue under Measure C for the entire year. As of February 18th, we had already surpassed that number, but we're not anticipating necessarily huge numbers between now and the end of the year. I would project somewhere on the order of $550,000, so maybe an additional $140,000 to the general fund between now and year end. I think that's a conservative number. We note that we are aware that with the commercial cultivation ordinance that is now in effect, we will be bringing forward recommendations and discussion with respect to Measure C throughout the budget process, but we believe that discussion is preliminary at this point, and certainly nothing that we would recommend budgeting in this current fiscal year. So to more or less sum it up, key areas impacting mid-year position: salary savings, unfortunately not as much as we would like to see given the current circumstances, but we're hopeful that our estimate is a low number and that we'll be pleasantly surprised perhaps with more salary savings come year end. We're not recommending a significant draw against contingencies. Approximately $240,000 were the board to accept our recommendations. With respect to the budgeted teeter transfer of 5.7, we have spoken with the Office of the Auditor Controller and cautiously are hopeful that we will not need to make that transfer, any of it. And certainly if we did, that it would be on the lower end, and certainly not anything approximating the entire budgeted transfer. And the budgeted REM loans and the disaster budgets, which we discussed, and given that we stripped those revenues out, what we are hoping and are seeing is that the budget is no longer so heavily dependent on those fluctuations and expenditures and revenues. So again, we're cautiously optimistic of a $2 to $3 million cash carry, which we think will be conservative. And again, that number has been arrived at by looking at the things we've talked about during this presentation and in conjunction with conversations with the Auditor Control. any
Okay,
questions.
does the board have any questions on just this part? Are there any questions or comments from the public on this part of the presentation? Okay, I'm bring it back. On the disaster budget shortfall, did I hear you to say that you're recommending that it's pulled out and handled separately?
So when we brought forth our recommendations for the adopted budget, one of the things that the CAO recommended and the board approved was stripping out all excess revenues that were prior year revenues or that were in excess of what we thought our expenditures would be. And that's already been done. We do have some budgeted revenues in those budget units, but very, very little. Most of what's budgeted in those units are REM transfers with a handful of roads funding, or a small amount of roads funding that we budgeted after conversations with Public Works and got comfortable that was a reasonable thing to do.
Okay.
Also, tree mortality has some budgeted
Right.
revenue.
Should we move to the next portion of items to consider for any budget requests or adjustments? Seeing none, we'll assume there'll be no budget adjustments. I'm not having any comment from anybody. Sheriff?
Easy.
So we tried to get that one through.
Would it be helpful if we were to discuss what we're recommending?
Yes, could you please
First,
discuss?
You might-
and
Not
then
at
let-
all.
Okay.
Let the sheriff speak and Carlos have his thoughts.
No, we want to hear what they have to say. I will, I know. Krista, could you go ahead and say what it is, and then let the sheriff comment on what it is
Okay.
staff's recommending?
And then I can pull up his
Out of money
his
for bullets.
spreadsheet. So we can go through at the board's discretion as many of these changes as you would like to discuss. The 4 requests for additional general funds, I will highlight for you now. One of them, oh, sorry. Okay. So here we go. And I apologize, this is a little difficult to read. So this is our animal services budget unit. We're requesting an additional $58,000 to cover the shortfall from the approximately $75,000 that they have unexpectedly expended so far this year due to the horse rescue. So in addition, the Environmental Management Agency went through its other budget units and found economies anywhere they could. So they found $1,600 in environmental health and some additional funding, but it's still, that would feed back into that $58,000 number to try and help offset it. And you can see what other expenditures in their budget unit they've reduced in an effort to absorb the $75,000 that they have basically expended in this budget unit. In terms of the contract we were talking about earlier and available funding, that contract's a 3-year contract. Right now in services and supplies as of this date, Animal Services basically has very little funding available. However, most of the expenditures have been paid on the horse with respect to that contract. So this time last year, they had on the order of $92,000 in their budget unit, but they still closed out the year with more than $43,000 in general fund monies available. So while we defer completely to Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Banner with respect to whether additional funding would be needed in this budget unit, if this year were last year, with the full understanding that the events of the last several days are another outlier, and I'm not sure what that might mean for this budget unit. But at the end of the day, this would have been a more than sufficient number to carry them, this $58,000, until the end of the fiscal year. So our second request is actually from the board. And so although the board had no control over the issue at hand. So if we look here, we see that there is a $16,000 request for group health insurance. So this came as a surprise certainly to me, and I think to everyone. And it turns out, after doing some research, that we had this issue strictly with respect to the board's budget unit in our personnel cost forecasting, where certain types of health insurance weren't being properly reflected, certain elections. And unfortunately, across the entire fiscal year, this is the number that we believe, and the clerk believes, is going to be required in order to safely carry the board through to the end of the fiscal year. And my apologies to the board for that. So if we go to item 13. This is $5,530. This is a request for general fund contribution for the Butte Tree public budget. In this instance, what happened was the Auditor Controller's Office identified a prior year billing issue, and instead of being billed to this budget unit, it was billed to a different budget unit. And so this is part of an effort on behalf of the Auditor Controller to clean that up. We understand that that process is ongoing in their office. This is the adjustment that we're requesting now. And then last but certainly not least, we have a $165,000 request for the Sheriff's Department. So I'll pull up for you in a moment what the Sheriff's, kind of their highlight is of their requests. We, given our current financial situation and minimal contingency, did not recommend several of their requests, but the two that we are recommending are $55,000 for, so the $55,000 is what they would receive for revenue towards an F-150 that was wrecked in September of this year. They're requesting an additional $21,000 that would be the general fund contribution in order for them to fully replace and outfit that vehicle. That vehicle is also included on attachment C, capital assets list. Also included in their capital request would be $144,740, which you may recall was for vehicle outfitting from 18-19 that they expended from 19-20 funds. And back in September, when we went through the budget process, we agreed that we would revisit this at mid-year. And so we bring this forth as a recommendation to you now. And additionally, it's the $21,000 and the $55,000, all told $76,000 for the F-150 that was totaled back in September. So those are all of the general fund requests that we are recommending across all departments that would require additional general funds. And the total draw would be $237,683 after other funding is considered. Attachment B pertain to, are requests that pertain to non-general fund departments and or special revenue funds, and attachment C is the updated capital assets list. I'm happy to discuss anything else on any of these attachments that the board might wish to. And I can also pull up the sheriff's overview when the board would like to see that.
Madam Chair. Discussion. Thank you, Krista.
Yeah, go ahead.
The 165 that we have out for the sheriff here, is that, you said some of these requests we approved, some of them we didn't. You want to unpack that a little bit?
Bring that back. We agreed to bring it back,
Right.
this item back.
Right. I just want to see, is there anything we didn't approve?
For the sheriff's department?
I'm sure there's a long list, but
Yeah, let me just pull that up right quick.
Yeah, if I remember, it's like
Yeah.
a scroll.
Okay, so I'll just run down these quickly. The first request number 1 on their overview is the $144,000 that we did request. I'm just going to kind of gloss over the ones that we did not, and I'll let Sheriff DeBasilio or whoever from the Sheriff's Department would like to come up and discuss these other requests. The $76,000 that you see here for the F-150, we are recommending. Those are the two that we're recommending. The others, I'm happy to scroll. Would you like to give us an overview,
Sure, the sheriff will.
Sheriff?
happy to explain them to us.
Good afternoon. Everybody had a full lunch, I'm assuming?
Are we going to lose it?
No, actually, I'm here to make life easy for you, Supervisor
Thank God,
Toffanelli.
Rick, thank you.
I am all about helping out the county, you know that. As the CAO's office talked, the 144.7 was for the outfitting of the vehicles that we talked about pushing back to now. We had the wrecked vehicle that we need to get replaced. When I go through our budget, let me get to my notes here. I have about almost $368,000 in salary savings. Kristen made a very good point that our salary savings in this past year has gone way down, and that's because my employee numbers have gone up. Just so you know, March 23rd of this year, I will be fully staffed with the amount of patrol personnel that you have allotted me. Okay, that's the first time in a long, long time. However, that being said, we are still about 9 people short from where we were back in 2005, 6, and 7. So there's a correlation there. We still don't have the number of people on the streets because now we have people in the marijuana enforcement team. So that being said, we're looking internally at a potential of a shortfall in overtime. My jail is still understaffed. We're still having a lot of overtime in our jail. So if you remember last year's budget, you guys pulled $100,000 from me, and I'm okay with that. Again, I'm here to work with you guys. But out of that $368,000 that I have in salary savings, I would like to pull a couple $100,000 of that and transfer it into my overtime budget so I don't have to come back and talk to you folks again about overtime. With that other almost $168,000, I talked to some of you folks about bringing on 4 new members, deputies, to put in the marijuana team. However, seeing the numbers, and again, I'm wanting to work here, I would be asking to just drop that to 2 people, and my salary savings would cover those 2 people through the rest of this fiscal year and still have some monies left over if we wanted to carry that into the next year's budget. And I know I don't like to use this terminology because Rebecca Callan's the one that brought it out, and I disputed it, sweeping money. Well, if you're going to sweep some money, sweep it back into my department, because that's where it's at now. So let's try and keep it there. And just for some hindsight, and I understand, I've talked to the CAO's office, and they're concerned, as you folks have a legitimate reason to be concerned about bringing on more employees, because we don't know where the Measure C tax is going to go. Keep in the back of your mind, I've been working with county council and the Department of State hospitals to rent out 10 beds in my jail, our jail. And that's going to equate to about $350,000 a year. And those beds, we should be up and running, we're hoping around July. So you're going to start seeing some revenues coming into the sheriff's office through the jail for that position, or for those beds. So I'm doing my part to bring money back into the department. So what I'm requesting is that the MOU increases, the county pick up, and let me cover my 2 new deputies. And I'll even go so far as covering the cost of this F-450 that's up there to pull the new Bobcat and trailer that we picked up through asset forfeiture to eradicate the illegal marijuana grows. I believe that it's imperative that we enforce the illegal side so that the legal side, so we don't get overrun like we did in 2016. That's the bottom line. So, and if you're willing to pick up the 450, I would be more than happy to have you do that out of general fund, because the Dirty Works contract that we have, we spent last year it's about $101,000. Well, I've already saved us money because I used asset forfeiture money to buy bless you. We used asset forfeiture money to buy the tractor and the trailer. So if the county would pick up the cost of the vehicle to haul that with, I'm not going to have to use Dirty Works at all. It's going to save you over $100,000. So in interim, it's going to save you probably about $30,000.
Which you want to keep in your department.
Pardon me?
Which you're going to want to keep in your department. So I just sort of have a technical question.
Sure.
If the sheriff gets 350 plus or minus for renting out jail space, is that money that has to stay in jail, or does it roll into the general fund?
Technically, that money would go back into the general fund. However, right now we're renting out beds to Amador County, and those funds come back and they go to the general fund.
So Sheriff, you want funding for 2 new deputies, but you're lacking in jail staff. So is the priority deputies, or is the priority correctional officers?
The priorities on both sides. We're doing some very heavy recruiting right now for correctional staff to get our correctional numbers up. Correctional staff doesn't realistically have anything to do with the illicit marijuana that we're going to have when it comes around. They're two different ball games. So hiring correctional staff, those are positions that I still have. So I'm not asking for positions there, and that's where some of the salary savings is coming from.
From vacant
correctional staff.
officers.
Yes, ma'am.
You also receive a federal grant
Yes,
for cannabis marijuana eradication.
Correct.
So
that grant right now it's kind of split. The first half is about $30,000. That was for the 1920 budget cycle.
Oh, that's at 30 and 45.
Yes, ma'am. And then the $45,000 will come in next year's budget. The issue with that is that I can't use that for equipment at all. That is specifically, if you read that grant, that is specifically for personnel costs. And it's not for full-time personnel costs, it more talks about overtime costs. And that's where we're able to, when we do these big eradications, when you see the line of vehicles going down the road, there's the marijuana team, and then there's a lot of extra overtime people on staff to assist with the grows. And just to give you an idea of what we did last year we did a total of 76 grows, and out of that, 67 of them were outdoors. And we were not able to utilize Dirty Works on a lot of those because I was on them. So I'm telling you, they weren't able to come out because they were busy. That was one of the reasons why I went and purchased that cat, so that we can do more grows and not have to wait for a contractor.
So you have 5 people in the marijuana eradication task force now.
I have a sergeant and 4 deputies right now.
So then you'll have a sergeant and 6 deputies.
Yes, ma'am. And that still is 10 short from where we really need to be, honestly, to get illegal marijuana.
Repeat what you said, where you know DB?
I said realistically, I need another 10 more to keep the illicit marijuana down. I want to make this county to where if we're going to have legal marijuana, I want to make this county to where the illegals are going to come up and go, we don't want to go up there because the cops are going to take our weed. That's the ultimate goal, as it is in any law enforcement, whether it's burglaries or not. And that's the other caveat to this, and I've talked to Jack about this, and some of you others, that if these 2 people are not out doing marijuana eradications, I can have them out doing what we call a SET program, which is special enforcement teams. And just a quick rundown, and I think I talked to you about this at another board meeting. We did some SET operations the nights of December 12th and 13th and January 3rd. They conducted 27 car stops and suspicious person contacts. They investigated 7 suspicious vehicles and conducted undercover surveillance. The special enforcement resulted in pulling 47.5 grams of methamphetamine off the street, 8.5 grams of marijuana. We made 10 arrests and seized 4 vehicles. So they're able to do something because we have the people and the personnel to do it. So we're starting to get back to where we can keep our community and your constituents safer. All I'm doing is trying to enhance that. And I'm trying to use the money that you've already allocated me to do that with.
Why,
Just because.
because he's the sheriff. Why that task force versus additional deputies on the street? You know, another...
Because those are not on overtime. So now you have people that are doing stuff that is not on overtime. So we can do them more often. The overtime, again, is limited because we only have so much funding in overtime. So if I have people that are fully staffed, they can be doing that all the time. Again, they could be doing marijuana and doing the SET stuff. They'd be dual sport.
Mr. Alt, where are you on this?
Well, the sheriff and undersheriff and his staff and I, Krista, have all met. They know that we support heavily the concept of mating up the regulatory program and strong illicit enforcement. So from a philosophical perspective, I support the need for the deputies to be on the illicit enforcement. We want to bring all of this together to where our regulatory program has an opportunity to succeed. So their enforcement is really beating back the illicit side of it. That said, really, the only difference between where he's at and where we were at in our recommendation is on the finances of it. We more were along the lines in our recommendation of looking at where we would be in the recommended budget and what projections we may be able to do by that time on what the canopy may look like in the regulatory program and how we may be able to fund some of these things out of Measure C. The issue with that is I'm looking at fiscal year and he's looking at grow year, frankly. Our fiscal year doesn't align with the illicit grow year. And so I understand, the differences in his points and mine. My responsibility is fiscal, his is obviously law enforcement. So we're about 6 months apart on being able to mate up the recommendations. I wouldn't panic if the board voted one way or the other. We can support the idea, and frankly, and the sheriff's office knows this, that we'll be making every effort that we can to try and find resources for them for, addressing the illicit growth. So, I'd like to be more distinct than that. We put forward our recommendation, but I certainly wouldn't be panicked if we extended a little bit. And frankly, when we make our recommendations, we know there's always challenges that the board is going to face in making the decisions, and we'll work to take care of those if the board makes a decision to support the sheriff.
I mean, this is at a 6-month review. When we go into regular budget, he's going to be back here again asking for 2 more, 3 more, 4 more, 10 more.
Well, we know that's his
Positions.
MO.
I know.
We do expect that, but by the same token, where we are aligned is that my goal for the regulatory program, and frankly for our citizens, is that we put as much effort and resources as we can onto the illicit side. It's the only way that we see together that we're going to be able to have a strong regulatory program. And now we get to talk about the program in whole and how we can partner together as opposed to it just being regulatory or illicit. And we're really trying to come together on that.
I mean, I don't think we should just say Measure C. Measure C revenue is just another TOT for the county. It's not allocated, it's a general fund allocation.
True.
So if we approve this, does that mean you're going to be reducing you're taking the funding from the jail for this 6-month period?
Those are
That's-
positions that are underfilled right now, or not filled right now, so correct. We're still trying to get them filled, but I truly believe that the amount of money that we will have left, I will still be able to hire people and put them in those positions. It's not realistic to believe that, I think I'm down 7 people in the jail right now, maybe 8, and it's not realistic to believe that I'm able to hire them today and them start tomorrow. It's a process. It's just like hiring the deputy. It takes some time to do that. Okay, so Jim just told me that some of the salary savings is from the jail and some is from patrol also. But it was that was the total. The 368,000 was what I was giving you as a total of
That's the
salary
total of
savings.
Salary savings from both the jail and patrol.
Correct.
And the CAO is recommending 165,000. Is that correct?
Well, the 165.
Oh, well, hold on. Is that your recommendation to the sheriff's office is $165,000 out of general fund
I believe it's
contingency?
the 144 plus 76 and then a revenue offset from the insurance. I don't know the exact dollar
Yeah, it's
amount,
about
so.
165.
Okay, and
the
for your
radios and for
request
the
of
truck.
430, you're trying to backfill with that 368
Correct.
through his salary savings? Is that the gist of what's going on here? Just so, yeah, okay.
I do call it the sheriff's office math. It's always a little upside
I
down.
thought so too. That seemed very convoluted to me. Because
Well,
when I look
Marita,
at-
I won't go for any more deputies. I'll just pull them out of Forest Meadows. We already talked about that.
Wait a minle. You
I
have
guess I'm
deputies in
gonna have
Forest
to,
Meadows?
I guess I'm going to have to get a
Not
concealed
Valley
weapon
Hills Estates?
permit.
See, the way I lose.
Lord love a duck. So if I understand it, it's now down to 166,000 is what's being requested. Krista, do I have that correct?
165.70,
Yeah,
165.
74,
Right.
74,
And
70.
he wants 430, and he wants to backfill it with salary savings. So basically the gist of what all this discussion is about.
If
that's
I,
not how
let me
I'm
see if I
reading it.
understand
It's
it.
sheriff's
I'm trying to
map.
repeat it and see if I've got this right. So CO's office is saying we want to give the sheriff $165,740 into their account, takes care of the vehicles and some other items.
Correct.
Sheriff is saying that there's $367,000 in total salary savings he anticipates this year.
Correct.
He wants 200,000 of it to go into overtime budget, so he
Correct.
doesn't come back because they won't spend a nickel over 200,000, and put 167,000 towards 2 new deputies, and we'll have to fund full-time next year. But in exchange for that,
Correct.
it'll only be a 2-deputy request
Correct. Instead of
for
4.
2021.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes,
Sheriff?
that is
so
correct.
he'll not be coming back to us at the next budget for 2021 asking for anything.
Not for 4. I won't ask for 4.
But I thought you were just...
Yeah.
I will be coming back, yes, Chair Callaway, next year's budget to ask for 2 more.
Okay, so there's 2 more that will come down.
I'm looking to get 4, yes.
The salary savings that, excuse me, the salary savings that you're quoting at 368, that's as today's date?
January 24th, when I read
So
numbers.
it's been a month ago.
Yeah, not quite. Yeah, a month
Quite a
ago,
month.
you're right.
Yeah, 24th.
Month and a day.
Yeah. Okay. And you have 4 new deputies coming on March 24th, you said?
Correct.
And part of the salary savings are from those 4 positions?
Yes, those, because those positions are not filled, they're in the academy right now. Correct.
I think I need to sit down with your fiscal officer when you're not there,
I've got him pretty well dialed in.
I'm sure. Okay.
The only thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and this is just for an FYI, for our trial court security, and this is something that you're very familiar with, we're going to start getting, and I have to give Under Sheriff Macedo huge credit on this, because the way we've been funding the court security and using annuitants, and because our staffing levels are getting fuller now we have deputies over there, and Chair Callaway is very familiar with the ongoing fight that the State Sheriff's Association is having with the courts with their MOU. They're not paying us what it costs us to put a deputy over there. So the funding that Under Sheriff Macedo has been able to kind of set aside to help pay for deputies over there is coming to an end, because we've had annuitants retire, and we've had, again, our staffing levels have gone up, so we've been able to put court personnel over there. So we're going to get to a point to where we're going to be upside down, and the general fund is going to be supplying monies to deputies to work the courts because the courts aren't paying us. So, and again, Chair Callaway is very familiar with that. This has been a fight that's been going on for years. And just to give you an idea, like Orange County is like $15 million out of general fund every year for their court security, because obviously the size they are. But we've been doing very well, but that very well is coming to an end. So just be aware of that.
Is that because annuitants are not available?
Yeah, I've tried to recruit annuitants, and they're very, very difficult to get to come back, because what happens is the folks that retire, they're like, shit, I'm retired, and they want to take 3 or 4 years before they go back to work, and then the ones that are doing it are retiring out again. Al Courtwright, for example, Jim Jorgensen, 52 years these guys put in law enforcement. They've retired, they're done. So it's just it's a vicious cycle. And I know that there are a lot of other states that don't allow annuitants to work in their court systems at all. So we're lucky.
What are the other counties, the other rural counties? I mean, we're all in the same position.
We're all fighting it tooth and nail, Ms. Callaway, but it's a battle that is going to come down to, I hate to say this, the courts are going to have to make a decision on whether they have to uphold their MOU or let us get another MOU. When I say us, I'm talking about sheriffs. They've kind of got us over between a rock and a hard spot, because who is going to adjudicate to say the judges don't have to have court security in there, and that the state has to pay? Well, the states pay the judges. So they're not going to, we're fighting them. They don't want to give us any more money. It's been difficult. And again, when we moved into this new jail and they built a new courthouse, Under Sheriff Macedo went to state finance and got the lady to come up here, her name's Diane, to say, look, okay, you had 2 down there, 2 courtrooms, now you have 4, so we have to up it. Well, they upped it, they gave us 4 deputies, but they didn't give us any more funding. So again, we're getting to a point that sooner or later, and sooner that rather than later, we're going to find ourselves upside down, and you're going to see more general funds expended in our court security because of the way the courts.
When is the MOU up, do you know?
That's the problem.
It's forever.
It's forever until they decide to change it. They've got us over a barrel. It's very unfortunate. Like I said, we're fighting it, and the CCOG is.
Yeah. Okay.
If I could
All right.
just
Let me
one last
yes.
clarification.
Sure.
Part of the deal we were just discussing, before we got to jail, to court security, was you'll use asset forfeiture to pick up the cost of that 450 trailer?
I'll either use asset forfeiture, I'll find the money, but it won't come
You
from
did it-
general fund. I will
You did it
take
with,
care,
same thing you did with the
with the
skip loader.
tractor, I will do that.
Okay. All right, any more questions of the sheriff? Mr. Mills?
Sheriff, on org key 33, what's going on with that one? That's the communications dispatch?
We're upside down. We don't have enough dispatchers. There's no salary savings because of the overtime that they're working to keep the radios and telephones going.
The reason I say that is I don't see that in this list,
As far as,
the money.
there isn't any.
There isn't any. Okay, so
We've
it's a
spent it
negative.
all.
So it's a negative.
Yeah, I believe so, is it not? Yeah,
We're projecting about a $26,000
Shortfall.
shortfall in overtime and dispatch.
When are we going to ask to get that balanced out?
The sheriff and I were just discussing that at the podium. I believe that's part of the salary savings transfer. I was hoping to handle this in an item-by-item way.
I would like
but
to handle it in an
I don't
item-by-item.
control what the board does, so with respect to that, I think what the sheriff has proposed is utilizing salary savings to cover shortfalls in 3 different budget units.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the same thing with org key 38, then jail MOU?
Yes.
Same thing?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions or editorial comments for the sheriff? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Actually, if I could,
Oh, Krista, did you, Sheriff?
Oh, you want to talk to me? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
okay, just to be clear, so you're talking salary savings from one of your existing budget units, not salary savings to be budgeted as an additional general fund transfer into your budget units for MOU increases?
Correct.
Okay.
The salary savings is for the overtime and to fund the 2 deputies.
All within his budget.
Pardon me?
All within his budget now. He's not asking to transfer any from contingencies.
Correct.
It's within his budget from salaries.
It's all within the budget. The only thing that and just so the board's clear, the 167 for the radio equipment and the replacement vehicle, there isn't enough. You keep going there. Is what the CAO's office recommended. They're wanting the sheriff's office to use my salary savings to pay for the MOU increases. And I'm asking that the board cover the MOU increases so that I can cover everything else.
Right,
So
so is
that
it,
does increase, excuse me, so that will increase the contingency draw here from 165 to whatever it was, 50,000 and 22,000?
is it the full, if I understand correctly, it would be a 430,000 altogether general fund draw, so the additional 265,000 would be a draw on contingency, which would put our contingency at about $1 million.
It'd be, what's the total he's asking for general fund contingency, the total amount, adding to 165?
It would be, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Sheriff, $430,000,
Which was what was up there.
an
Yep.
additional 265,000 other than what, over and above what the CAO's office is recommending.
But they're stating salary savings is there.
Yeah, I'm a little
That's-
bit,
yeah,
I'm a little
I have
bit
to look
confused
and
here on
check
what's
the
being
shelf
said.
here.
There's
Because
144,700, I believe it is,
For the vehicle.
the radios, for the vehicles.
correct.
There is the 55,000 for the replacement vehicle. That's one number. The other number is the MOU increases that the board approved for staff, which is $267,000, correct?
For your
Oscar's got it right
comments-
here. Let me ask
Yeah,
Oscar.
For the
can
remainder of
speak
the
to that.
year?
I don't think it's
Yeah.
actually quite that much.
Go ahead, Oscar.
But wait, what's a launcher?
Krista, would you,
Well, how was that
I
salary
thought you had
No,
this
it's
sheet.
using salary savings.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So,
Don't give up on this, you're at a roll.
if you all look at the projection on board, so our request item number 1, the CAO recommended, and it's included in the adjustments that the CAO is proposing. Item number 2, and 5, 3, and 4, and 5, is it, or am I looking at it wrong? Yeah, 5, 3, and 4, and 5. So the second number 5, the 76,000, is the second one that the CAO is recommending. All the other lines, the CAO is not recommending. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, so there is a little reconciliation. There's the third line that I labeled on C on the right-hand side, that is being funded per the adjustments that CAO is recommending. Within the 267, there is the 76,000 for the new replacement vehicle. Label number B is the MOU for the 3 budget units, and the total for all 3 budget units would be 737 of additional funding that we're requesting. And what the sheriff is agreeing to is paying the difference between the 267 and the 76 that is included in the recommended adjustments with salary savings.
So that's a net to the general fund of what? I mean,
171.
not the sheriff's budget unit, but to contingency or wherever we pull it.
What he's requesting for is almost 172.
367.
172,000, the middle one, letter B.
It's 320,000.
Yes,
Okay.
it's the 171
And the 144.
and the 144.
Right.
Yes.
That's what you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
I wasn't sleeping.
I never said you were.
Mr. Alt, Ms. Van Lotte, what are your thoughts on this? Is this something that, compared to what other units need? You two are eyeballing each other. I think we'd like some clarification here.
Well, I stand by the recommendation we put forward. At the end of the day, the recommendation we put forward was what we think is in line with the philosophy we put forward, the final budget in September. But I will reiterate, what we did in September and what we put forward in mid-year is a fiscal year concern, and it doesn't necessarily align with what the sheriff's office is trying to accomplish with the illicit enforcement. And that, unfortunately, that's just, the policy decision spot that you're in now, is making that decision whether or not you're willing to sacrifice about $175,000 for that enforcement, or do we roll it forward in the next budget year and account for it there. Frankly, whether it's here or in the new budget year, I've committed this before, I'm going to do it again on record to say that as we put budgets forward, I'm going to continue to recommend to try and put resources to the illicit enforcement. It's just a matter of time and when we do it. I think we're better prepared fiscally to do it coming into the new year, but by the same token, that puts them at a deficit with their enforcement.
Can I just
Under Sheriff.
add one note? The MOU impacts were unanticipated to our budget, so we're absorbing those. And if you recall, as a matter of policy, the county had done that for several years, which negatively affected the sheriff's office quite a bit because it was a large impact. And we're back at it again. We had stopped that as a policy matter, and when we met with the CAO's office and they discussed why they were doing it yet again this year, we disagreed with that, but we understood their philosophy. But it does negatively impact us, and it's negatively impacting the sheriff's ability to pay for what he just asked you for. We didn't know that that was going to happen at the beginning of the year, so that was a negative impact. And the sheriff's point with the trial court security, when you have MOU adjustments or increases to underfunded divisions such as trial court security, it further exacerbates the impact on that unit on top of that. So there's some play here, and I think he's been very generous with the board. He's offering to pay for some things, but all he's asking for is money that's potentially going to be swept back out of our own budget.
Where we tried to be, what the undersheriff has said is absolutely true. We recognize in the budget development process, it's not fair to any of our departments to say that when we sit in negotiations that they have to pick up an MOU increase. Frankly, it hinders our negotiations as well because we're more considerate of how we're going to ultimately impact the departments. In the future, I'd like to be more cognizant of how we address that, and I've committed it not only to this department but others, that it's a really big lift for them to have to pick up what we negotiate. We're certainly obligated to do it. We need to give our employees as many enhancements as we can, but it's difficult for all of the departments. And in this particular year, we tried to stay consistent and not pick bigger departments or smaller departments that would benefit from us picking up any of the MOU enhancements. We try to stay pretty consistent and try and ask, not try, but direct that departments pick it up to the extent that they could in their budget. So we've been consistent in that way, but the deficit that the undersheriff has spoken to is just as true as the statements that I just provided.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions or clarifications?
Well, yeah. That being the case of what you're saying, he doesn't have $238,000 in salary savings because he's being asked to pick up the MOUs. Is that correct? I mean, the figures that were given to us were excluding the MOU increases as of January 24th. Or are you projecting that much salary increase picking up the MOU?
No, that's just it. I'm trying to work with you to have you pick up the MOU increased costs so that I can support the community with these other two deputies. That's the bottom line.
I mean, that's,
I know it's dogs over deputies, but there's a point to where we need
no,
to.
I guess what I say is that argument holds true for every single department.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Al said it just a moment ago, that it hasn't been something that we've been practicing. We got away from that, and we had to do it this year because of what they're trying to do with the budget shortfalls. But I'm just asking for a little leniency, I guess, Supervisor Callaway, because of what I'm trying to do for public safety. To enhance a program that we've just put forth, I don't want to be overrun like I did. And if I can start adding to that force to get rid of the illicit grows, that benefits the whole county, which again brings...
I don't question the honor of what you're doing or the goal. I mean, it's the same for all of us.
I agree.
So my concern or my question is, are other departments also paying the price for our doing that? And it seems like going into this next 6 months and reading the documents, that isn't really going to be maybe an issue for the next 6 months, but it will become an issue when we go into the budget for 2021. And so, do we do it now or do we do it in 6 months? And of course, the impact to the other. It's like the MOU. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Alt, but, you know, we negotiate on behalf of all the departments, and if they don't want to give their employees raises because they're not going to have to absorb the MOU, well, that's not very realistic. And we negotiate.
But that's not true. We don't give them raises. If I could give my guys raises, they'd all be making $50 an hour. That's not my option. That is your five
No,
option.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is we negotiate and with the unions.
But you're not negotiating for me, ma'am. I disagree. You do not negotiate for the sheriff's office for raises.
Well,
You negotiate with a union
Correct.
who happens to work within the sheriff's office. So anytime that you give somebody a raise, it impacts my department.
correct, and that's true for SEIU.
Everybody,
It's-
absolutely.
It's true for the DA's
Absolutely.
office. I understand that. So when you say we pick it up, when it comes to budget, the departments have to pay for whatever the increases are that are negotiated with the unions, DSA, SEIU, unrepresented, so forth.
But in the past 3 years, since Manny Lopez came in, he changed that practice so that that money was added to our budget. So it wasn't actually an impact to our budget. The county was picking up those costs. And now you're requesting that the departments pick those costs up again. And again, I'm being sympathetic because I understand, but mine is the largest general fund department, so it's a huge impact to my department. And it ties my hands to do what I need to do to protect our community. That's all. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I understand. I'm just telling you how it affects my department. I can't talk for Christian Brinks. I can't talk for Josh. I can't talk for them. That's not my job. I'm talking about my department. And I'm trying to work with the county, you 5 as best, and 6 and 7 here, as best I can to use other funding to support my department in the best way that I can. Whether it's asset forfeiture, or whether it's AB 443 money, or whether I use a lot of money from the Friends of the Sheriff's Office to purchase things so that I don't have to come to the county and ask for funds.
I hear what you're saying.
So this is the one time that I'm coming and I'm requesting, and again, it's a request. You have the final say, that help me help your constituents. God, I sound like Tom Cruise.
Well, I mean, the elections officer could be in here giving the same speech.
So as a matter of
I mean, I just-
context,
I'm
from the
sorry.
budget perspective, if we would have held money out of the system at the beginning of the year to keep another, say, $3 million in contingency or reserve, or wherever we may keep it in anticipation for negotiations, then it wouldn't have been in the system. We wouldn't have allocated it at the beginning of the year. That's always going to be the case. Whether we fund the MOU increases or the departments pick the MOU increases up, the pie hasn't gotten any bigger because of the MOU increases. So it's just a matter of where we set it aside and how we try and track it. But as a practical matter, I think it's wise. I've been in departments that have been affected this way. I think from a practical matter, I prefer for us long-term to be in a fiscal position where we have more money in reserves and contingencies and some of the other areas that we had to pick at to make the adjustments with the disaster budgets and kind of get us right-sized on that. But in the future, the dialogue will be, well, if you weren't putting so much in contingencies and reserves and, say, unfunded liabilities and the PARS trust, then we'd have more money to spend in the field. And that's always going to be the dialogue because there's scarce resources in public entities. So it's a matter of where we shift it to.
Okay.
And, you know, it's a tough dialogue. We can go either way. And then,
All right.
you know, each of the departments are going to try and, you know, frankly, they're going to try and do their own budget tricks. If they know we're going to ask them to cover the MOU increases, they're going to ask for other things in other areas. So they hope they have enough to cover in the future when we negotiate the increases.
Okay, well, maybe some of this conversation is what we have when we go into budget for 2021. All right, I think we've beaten this up enough. It comes time for action on the part of the board. So,
One clarification as to how we calculated budget savings. So what I did is I took the actual numbers, say for example, patrol as of 1/24/2020. And then I divided it by the number of pay periods that had been paid through that date. In that case, were 11. And then I got an average. I increased it by a little bit just in case, and I multiplied that average times 15 pay periods remaining. And then I subtracted that from the total budget, and that's how I calculated the salary savings that he provided.
Well, there's something else here. It's something that's always baffled me in government, and that is that we want to so quickly find these numbers, but we've got an HR office sitting over there that has a cost of turnover. We want to build something into the budget. Let's talk about the whole number, and that is, what is it costing to maintain an open position, solicit for an open position, and all of that piece, and that's never in the calculations. It's like nobody wants to talk about that. So I just want to be sure that that's something, we're going to start budgeting for an open position in your departments. Let's also budget for what is the cost of the turnover to hold that open position from HR's perspective and all of the other pieces that have to make it work while that position is open. I just want that in the conversation.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what we've talked about in years past too, think about the cost of when people leave. Right now, I think Ms. Hawkins can attest to this or not, that I think our turnover rate in the jail right now is about 35%, and that's because people are going to CDCR. They're making $85,000 to start there. We can't compete with that. None of the counties can. But the cost of hiring somebody and getting them up to speed and then them leaving, they're taking that knowledge with them. So there's another huge cost.
Correct.
okay,
Chair?
Supervisor?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's time to move forward. I don't know how you want to do this, but I'll certainly support the deal that the sheriff put forward for the 2 new deputies. I would do it when we do the regular budget, in June, but we need these deputies now. It takes a while. We're not giving the full boat, we're giving half the boat. We'll talk about the full boat this summer, but I feel like we've got an agreement with the community that if we're going to do cannabis, we're going to do enforcement too. So I feel an obligation to hold up my end of the rope.
Is that a motion, Supervisor?
Yes.
So the motion is to approve the mid-year budget adjustments included.
Sorry, Chair, we do need public comment before.
Oh, I do?
a vote.
Where's
For
that
an act.
sign? Ask the public for comment.
Every item.
God dang. Thank you. Thank you. Is there any public comment on this or any staff comment on any of the items before us on this? No, Mr. Segala, you can go, please.
Honorary staff.
This is really confusing. I have a hard time understanding it all. It seemed like we want to be careful that county policy is not having an adverse effect on the illegal marijuana growing. And so we need to have information as to what's really happening. We know we have an ordinance that allows a certain number of existing growers to continue growing or to sell their rights to somebody else. We don't know right now if the illegal growers are growing on their own property. Do they own it? Is that property subject to liens for costs? We don't know that either. So we also don't know the trend. What's happening in the marijuana market, or even the market for medical marijuana? Are some of these raids raiding medical marijuana people who are not registered, or maybe were formerly registered? I think if we could get a complete picture of what's happening in our county, and also a picture of what's happening in that market, we might be able to be helpful to law enforcement as to what's really needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Segal. Any other public comments? Does the staff have any comments? All right, I'm going to bring it back to the board. Supervisor Garamendi, you're approving the mid-year budget. That's your motion? To approve the
mid-year budget with the addition. How do you want to phrase this?
This would be
Sorry, Susan. How do you want to phrase this?
an increase of $171,000 from general fund contingencies to object code 5400 and budget unit patrol 101003220, and that would be an increase of general fund contribution. Is that consistent with what we discussed, gentlemen?
Okay, is there a second? Okay, it dies for lack of a second. Is there any other motion on the floor? Mr. Mills?
I would suggest we take these by request number and look at them individually then.
Is there support for that?
Sorry, what was it?
There's no, he wanted to go line item by line item on A and B, attachment A and B.
And
I
C.
don't support that, but I'm not sure where you are. I thought, Mr. Tuffanelli?
The motion that Jack made was for the
Yeah,
171,000
yeah,
to cover the MOU?
That's it, for the two new deputies.
for the two new deputies.
If all we're talking about is that. But if we're talking about all of this,
It was,
We're talking
No.
about all the
Sure.
mid-year.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. My issue is the items that you're reimbursing from a special fund back in to cover the cannabis cost out of that cannabis collection of $251,000. That's the issue that I have on this. If you want to make a motion, or if we can discuss that portion of this, I would probably agree with the rest of what's in front of us.
I'm sorry, Supervisor, I don't understand. I was
There's-
playing catch-up. I'm willing to amend, but I'm not sure I understand following.
Going down to page number 191, for instance.
I'm looking at a hard copy, so.
well, here. And look at
That's,
number 6.
What's 179 on your hard copy one?
Well, start with number 6, and that's
Or
this.
line item number,
Request number 6.
well, I was starting with that one, but we can start with line item number 6. Go to line item number 6.
It's request number 6. And 19, 20, 21, and 22.
You can make a statement.
Okay. I found where you're at.
Okay, those two items there, and going down to line item number 19, 20, 21, and 22.
And number 16 on the last page.
So you're concerned with my motion is approving the
Yeah.
budget put forward with CAO because we're reimbursing departments with cannabis regulatory fees?
Yes, and item number 16 on further down, under cannabis regulatory fees. I will not vote for that. It's just another way of what we've already did not get a 4/5 vote. It's just being redone. And I'm not in favor of doing that at this time.
So in specificity, what we're, if you recall, there was a budget transfer of approximately $197,000.
Correct? I know exactly where this is going.
Right, from the general fund budget.
From your department to different departments.
Right, so
Correct.
what we're asking for is not to create a whole new cannabis regulatory budget, but we're asking from receipts that we've already received in permit fees that we reimburse the general fund budget.
I understand that, but I'm still not in favor of that.
I understand, I'm just making sure that
Yeah.
everybody knows we're clear on it.
So if I understand right, so, I mean, that's a pretty core piece of this entire budget. If if that's not something we're going to do, then we got to pretty much start this thing over. We have to figure out how to make everything else, right?
I don't think it's pretty much core of this budget presented to us, but it's items that I won't be voting yes on. So if you want to make a motion removing all that reimbursement,
No, it would have been good to know that an hour and a half ago.
well, it didn't prevent the sheriff. Most of the time we've spent it on the sheriff.
I'm not
Okay.
amending the motion. I think we ought to reimburse departments for their expenses.
Okay. So there isn't a second on that motion to proceed. Is there another motion?
Again, Chair,
Again, we need four-fifths vote.
Chair, I'm asking for us to compromise a little bit here and take these request by request and look at them individually and see if we can get four-fifths vote on individual requests, at least make whole or make corrections to those pieces that we can get a four-fifths vote on today. If we can't do that, then there's no point in discussing any further.
Want to take a little break?
Okay, 5-minute break, please. To go over this line item by line item, there did not seem
Madam Chair.
CB support. Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us take a little break and regroup a little bit. First off, I'll make a statement. I think it is, I don't think it's fair and I don't think it's responsible to make departments pay out of every citizen of this county pay for regulation that people who are being regulated are already paid for. So I think that this is, I'm very disappointed that this fight continues and sour grapes. However, the business of the county has to go forward, and I will make a motion to remove the cannabis fee, regulatory fee items throughout this budget recommendation, keeping the rest of it intact, however, adding 2 positions to the marijuana enforcement team for the sheriff. So we'll take out the cannabis regulatory fee reimbursement so that all citizens of Calaveras can pay for it. And we'll also add 2 deputies would be my motion.
I have a motion by Supervisor Garamendi. Is there a second?
I will speak to that, and
Do you want to make a second and then speak to it?
no, I want to speak to it first.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying, Supervisor Garamendi, but I disagree a little bit on it. Again, this whole thing has not been right from the very beginning, including the fact that here we are in February 24th, 2020. We sat here in October of last year, and we're presented with this whole budget for this item in this regulatory department, and we were projecting $2.9 million. We have $251,000 at this time. I disagree with what you're having to say, somewhat with the entire public paying for it. The public pays these salaries for all departments and all items. It's up to us to dispense that money. I don't feel at this time confidently to release those funds for reimbursement. Perhaps when we get to the beginning of the year and the new budget and we have new funding and perhaps it's been increased, and be able to look at it. But at this time, I could not vote for that. And I thank you for changing your motion on that, and I will second the motion based on that.
Chair, can we have clarity here?
Yes.
Were we specifically removing then request number 6, 19, 20, 21, 22, and then on attachment B, number 16? Is that correct?
It's my understanding, he said he would make the motion removing all reimbursement. for the cannabis
All
program.
all reimbursement from the cannabis fee to the departments that have fronted the money for the unit. And still support, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, just so I'm clear, if I'm not mistaken, in some of those items, so for instance, mine, number 6, those potential reimbursements are not the only requests within that item. There's another adjustment for, and there may be in others as well, so I'm just not clear, is it?
What I'm saying is all reimbursements from Fund 56040000.
Okay.
56040000.
Correct.
And also on attachment B, number 16, there is no 5604, there's no number on it. Is that the same number?
Well, that's the
That's
cumulative
not-
number for all the reimbursements that you saw in those
Is
other.
that correct? Okay.
Well,
Just wanted to be sure.
I apologize to all the department heads who will have to figure out how to make this work, and I apologize to the citizens, but the budget and the business of the county has to keep going forward, so let's move.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any other comments from the board? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on a 401 absent vote of the board. Move to item the C on the capital asset list. Please, Ms. Van Lock.
Okay. So the appropriations are already included on attachments A and B. At item number 1 on attachment C is for the outfitting we discussed earlier for the 4 1819 vehicles. Then we have the $37,000 for the F-150 to replace Unit 1502 that was totaled in September, and the related outfitting for that vehicle. And an adjustment, number 2, for capital equipment for Public Works, and this is just to increase appropriations that were previously authorized for an asphalt zipper. The budget adjustments are already included and have never been
Any
approved.
questions or comments from the board on this? Any comments or questions from the public on this item? I'll bring it back to the board for a motion
So
or
moved.
action.
Second?
I have a motion by Supervisor Garamendi, a second by Supervisor Mills. Did you want to say something?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes on a 401 absent vote. Thank you. I'd like to move to supervisor announcements. Mr. Mills.
Wow, thank you.
I haven't forgotten.
Thank you. Wednesday, the 12th, we were in Modesto for Mountain Valley MS. An ambulance contract was approved for Arnold, our Abbott's Pass Fire. We have yet to get the RFP out for the rest of the county. And then also was the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Basin Authority in Stockton, and this was the cost to implement the plan, and we're moving forward with that. And there was some discussion about an MOU that's going to have to come back before this board as to how we are going to have, or what role we're going to have in that implementation of that plan. Thursday the 13th, I was up at Tridam in Strawberry, meeting their new general manager, Mr. Zimmerman. And on the 20th, Fairgrounds, there was an active shooter drill. Appreciate being involved in that, along with the discussion about the sanitary situation there and the horses. And then also on the 13th, Copper Fire, and some of the issues that are going on down there to coordinate with the county as well as the fire district. That's all I have.
Thank you. Supervisor Topanelli?
I have nothing.
Supervisor Garamendi? Nothing. I have nothing to report. I will move back to public comment. Mr. Segala, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, actually, these were going to be my comments at the last meeting, except that the comments were requested at the beginning of the meeting, and it didn't have an idea of what to say. And then after the meeting, it was too late for comments, so that's where we're at. I've emailed suggestions that you could use for subjects of study sessions throughout the year. And the essence of that email was to look at operations that are happening under your control in the form of ordinances that are not working or which have a negative effect on property rights in our local economy. And I suggest that you establish a committee that would include people in the industry, perhaps the building industry and real estate industry and maybe other ones that are affected in our economy that could come up with ideas of things that could make sense, that could allow you to make the county more freedom-friendly when it comes to our economy of those things you control. There's things that the state controls, which is probably most of our problem. I think you should do the same thing there. This time you would have a committee that would be probably more heavily populated by county personnel as well as the private sector. And maybe the building official will be prominent. To see those things that are hurting a local economy that may be suitable for San Francisco or San Diego, but are not suitable for Calaveras County. Identify those things and make suggestions for correction, and then work with CSAC and RCRC and directly with their state representatives to see if you can get them to make constructive changes to those laws. Same thing with the federal government. Work with Congressman McClintock, and you probably have a very open ear from him, because he's along with philosophically, he's along with this idea of protecting property rights and promoting prosperity. And in doing those things, it's going to take time, effort, and study sessions, and it's a job that could be established for the rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Any other public comments? Okay, this meeting stands adjourned.